The coffee was getting cold. That was the first thing Neville Oxton noticed when he walked into Boundary Bay Grill that Tuesday morning. Not the smell of maple syrup or the hiss of the flat-top griddle, not the cluster of fishing photographs along the paneled walls, not even the way every head in the place turned when the door swung open. He noticed the coffee going cold in a pot that had been sitting on the burner too long, the way it always did in diners that had been around long enough to stop caring about the details. Oxton set his bag down beside a booth near the window, the second one from the left, the one with the clear view of the marina. He came to Boundary Bay the same way he came to most places, quietly, without announcement, in clothes that said absolutely nothing about who he was or what he had spent the last 30 years becoming, dark jeans. A gray wool sweater with a pull near the left cuff, a canvas jacket he'd had since his time in Yellowknife. He looked, to anyone who bothered to glance over, like a man who fixed things for a living. Roofing, maybe, or plumbing. That was fine. That had always been fine. He had learned a long time ago that there were two kinds of people in the world, those who announced themselves, and those who let everything else do the announcing for them. Oxton had made his choice about that somewhere around the time he turned 40, and he had never seen reason to revisit it. He picked up the laminated menu. The eggs looked reasonable. The back bacon looked better. He was still reading when the chair-scraping sound reached him from across the diner, followed by the particular kind of footstep, heavy, deliberate, the walk of a man who wanted the floor to know he was crossing it. That Oxton had learned to recognize the way you learn to recognize the sound of weather changing. The man was in a uniform, dark green, municipal, the kind worn by regional bylaw enforcement officers in the smaller towns along the coast. His name tag read Figge. Mid-50s, broad across the chest, the kind of face that had decided a very long time ago that the world owed it something and had never updated that assessment. Figge stopped beside Oxton's booth. He didn't say anything immediately. That was a technique. Standing in silence over a seated person was a technique, and it was an old one, and it worked on most people because most people filled silence with apology. Oxton turned a page on the menu. "You waiting for someone?" Fig said finally. Oxton looked up. "Waiting for my order. Haven't placed one yet. Planning to." Figge pulled out the chair across from Oxton without being invited to sit in it and sat down. He put his forearms on the table and leaned forward in the way men like that lean, as if proximity itself was a form of authority. "Don't think I've seen you around here before," Figge said. "First time through. Where you coming from?" There was a woman 2 booths over, mid-60s, silver-haired, who had stopped cutting her pancakes. She was watching without watching, the way people do when they want to see what happens next but don't want to be seen wanting that. "Coming from the ferry," Oxton said. "Heading up toward Prince Rupert. Long drive, it is. What's the business up in Prince Rupert?" Oxton set the menu down. He looked at Fig the way a man looks at something he is deciding how much patience to extend to. "I'm going to have my breakfast," Oxton said, "and then I'm going to get back on the road." Figge's expression did something that wasn't quite a smile. "See, thing is, we've had some problems lately. In this town, break-ins up at the storage units on Meridian. Took a truck out of the impound lot last week, broad daylight. So when someone comes through that I don't recognize, someone who doesn't seem to be in any hurry to account for themselves." "I've accounted for myself," Oxton said. "Twice now. You got ID on you," and there it was. The silver-haired woman put her fork down. A younger man near the counter, early 30s, plaid shirt, construction boots, slowly rotated on his stool toward the booth. The waitress, whose name tag said Petra, had stopped pretending to refill the condiment rack. "I do," Oxton said. He did not reach for his wallet. "I'm going to need to see it." "You haven't told me what grounds you're stopping me on." Figge's jaw tightened. "I told you, there have been incidents. Incidents that I had nothing to do with. I got off the 8:45 ferry, I walked 4 blocks, I sat down to order breakfast. That's not a grounds for an ID check." "In this town," Figge said, and his voice dropped just slightly, the way voices drop when they're about to say something the speaker knows has an edge to it. "I decide what the grounds are." The diner had gone quiet in the way that diners go quiet, when everyone is listening, and everyone knows everyone else is listening, but nobody wants to be the first to say so. Oxton looked at Figge for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "Is that right?" It wasn't a question. Figge pushed back from the table slightly and crossed his arms. "I'm going to need you to come with me." "To where? Outside? We can talk about this outside." I'm not going outside. I'm going to order my breakfast. Sir, don't call me sir like that. Figgy stood up. He was a big man standing, and he used that the way big men sometimes use the simple fact of their own size, not threateningly, exactly, but as a reminder that the option existed. I'm going to ask you one more time, Fig said. Adi. Now. The woman with the silver hair, her name was June Alderwick, and she had lived in Boundary Bay for 41 years, and she had watched this particular scene play out in variations across her whole life, and had never once said anything, because she had always told herself it wasn't her place. It wasn't her moment. She didn't know the full story. June Alderwick set her napkin on the table and opened her mouth, and then closed it. Because the door to the diner opened. The man who came through it was tall, black, maybe 60, in a fleece vest and waterproof trousers, carrying a reusable coffee mug with a university logo on it. He stopped in the doorway when he took in the scene. Fig standing, Oxton seated, every face in the room arranged in the particular configuration of a situation that had not resolved itself yet. He said, Neville, and something shifted, not in the room. The room didn't know enough yet for anything to shift, but in Fig, something went through his face that he didn't intend. A flicker, a recalculation, because the man in the doorway was not nobody. His name was Commissioner Aldous Barry. No, his name was not that. His name was... The man in the doorway was Deputy Chief Edmund Tulloch, Regional RCMP, and he had been standing in the parking lot on his phone for the last 12 minutes, finishing a call with the Provincial Justice Minister, and he had come inside to get out of the February wind. Tulloch crossed the diner in 8 steps and stopped beside Oxton's booth. He looked at Fig. Keith, he said, and his voice was the voice of a man who knew exactly which sentence to leave unfinished. Fig said, I heard, Tulloch said, from outside, doors thin. He looked down at Oxton. You okay? Having a harder time ordering breakfast than I expected, Oxton said. Tulloch looked back at Fig. This is Dr. Neville Oxton. He is the lead forensic consultant for the Provincial Serious Crimes Unit. He was retained last month to work the Harland Creek case, which is the case that your regional office requested provincial assistance on in November, which is the case that I personally authorized. The room did not make a sound. Fig's face had done something complicated and was in the process of trying to undo it. I didn't. I wasn't informed. You weren't meant to be informed. That's what a consultant is. Tulloch's voice had not risen. It was the flatness of it that did the work. He's not required to explain himself to you. He's not required to show you anything. He is here in this town because your town asked for help, and the first thing that happened when he sat down for breakfast was you. The construction worker at the counter had turned all the way around on his stool now. He wasn't pretending to look at anything else. Petra, the waitress, had set down everything she was holding. I'm going to need you to step back, Tulloch said to Fig, and I'm going to need you to think very carefully about the report I'm going to be filing before end of week. Fig stepped back. His face had gone through the last of its changes and arrived somewhere gray and flat, the face of a man counting the distance between where he was standing and where he had thought he was standing, and finding it much larger than expected. He said, I apologize, to the general area of the booth, to no one in particular, to the table, to the air. Oxton looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up the menu again and said, without looking up, I'm going to have the back bacon, and the eggs over easy, and a coffee that hasn't been sitting on the burner for 40 minutes. Petra moved. She moved the way people move, when they are grateful to have something to do with their hands, when action is easier than sitting in the echo of what just happened. She moved fast, she grabbed the coffee pot, and she went to Oxton's table and poured without being asked, and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't have been small and insufficient. Fig walked back across the diner, slowly. The weight of his footsteps had changed. He pushed through the front door and did not let it swing. He caught it and closed it quietly, which was the loudest thing he could have done. The diner stayed quiet for about 4 seconds. Then June Alderwick, the silver-haired woman 2 booths over, picked up her fork. She cut a piece of pancake. She chewed it, and then she set her fork down again and looked across the room at Neville Oxton. I should have said something, she said, loud enough to carry, not loud enough to perform. Oxton looked at her. Earlier, she said, when he first sat down, I should have said something. Oxton was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes, you should have. Not unkindly, not as an accusation, just as the fact that it was. June Alderwick nodded once. She picked up her fork again. There was something in her face that had changed and would not change back. Tulloch slid into the seat across from Oxton and pulled off his gloves and set them on the table. He picked up the other menu. "The eggs any good here?" "I'll let you know," Oxton said. Outside, through the window that looked out over the marina, a small passenger ferry was making its way through the gray February water toward the dock. A flock of gulls hung above it, white against white, barely moving, held in place by the wind coming off the strait. Oxton watched it for a moment. He had been doing this work for 31 years. He had consulted on 94 cases across 7 provinces. He had sat in courtrooms and given testimony that put people away for the rest of their lives, and he had sat in conference rooms with deputy ministers and commissioners, and people who had his photograph on their wall above a title that contained the word distinguished. He had been awarded things. He had letters after his name that required a second line. He had been told, more times than he could count, by people who meant it sincerely, that he was exceptional, that he was remarkable, that he was not like other people. He had never wanted to be exceptional in the way they meant. He had wanted to be unremarkable, ordinary, the kind of man who could walk into a diner on a Tuesday morning and order eggs and back bacon and read the menu in peace without someone deciding from the doorway before a single word had been exchanged that he required explaining. 31 years, 94 cases, he was still waiting. The coffee, when it came, was fresh. Petra had made a new pot. She set it down in front of him without ceremony, without apology, without the performance of apology that would have been worse than nothing. And she said only, "I'll have your order up in about 10 minutes. "Thank you," Oxton said. She nodded and went back to the counter. Tulloch was reading the menu. He had said nothing else since Fig left, which was one of the things that made him good at his job. He understood that not everything needed processing out loud, that some things were better honored by simply continuing, by ordering breakfast, by drinking coffee, by letting the next thing come after the last thing without a ceremony between them. "Harland Creek," Oxton said. "We're going to need access to the county impound records. All of them, not just what the regional office pulled. Already requested," Tulloch said. "Supposed to be waiting for us at the detachment, and the lab results from the second site by Thursday." Oxton nodded. He picked up his coffee cup. It was warm all the way through, the way coffee is when it's made fresh, and he held it a moment before he drank. At the counter, the young man in the plaid shirt had turned back to face the counter. He was eating his toast. Across from him, his phone screen was lit up. He'd been typing something, some message to someone, and now he put the phone down and didn't finish it. Something about the morning had made the message feel less important than it had before. June Alderwick had stopped eating entirely. She was looking at the window, at the same gray water Oxton had been watching, and whatever she was thinking it quietly and all the way through. This was how things changed when they changed, not in speeches, not in moments that announced themselves. In a woman who set down her fork and said, "I should have said something to a stranger across a diner," knowing he would not forgive her, and meaning it anyway. In a man who drove up and down the coasts of this country, year after year, in a gray sweater with a pull near the cuff, doing work that mattered, being seen as nothing, and then being everything, not because anything about him had changed, but because the room finally had to reckon with the distance between what it had assumed and what was true. Fig's cruiser was still in the parking lot. Oxton could see it from the window. It sat there for 4 minutes. Then the engine turned over, and it backed out, and it left. When the food came, it was good. The eggs were exactly right. The back bacon had some char on the edges, the real kind, not the overdone kind. Petra had brought brown toast without being asked, which was what Oxton would have ordered anyway. He ate it slowly. He was not in a hurry. He had a long drive ahead of him, and a case waiting, and 31 years of knowing that the work was still there, regardless of what happened around it, and that the work was the thing. That had always been the thing. Tulloch ate his oatmeal and read something on his phone and did not make conversation, and the diner gradually returned to the sound of a diner, cutlery and coffee cups, and the flat-top griddle and the low murmur of 2 people in the far corner talking about something that had nothing to do with any of this. Oxton finished his coffee. He set down the cup. The quietest people he had learned were not the ones with the least to say. They were just the ones who had stopped explaining themselves to rooms that weren't ready to listen, and had kept moving anyway, through every diner, in every town, carrying everything they were in silence, waiting for the world to catch up.